Good morning everyone. Topic for today is choosing teaching methods for competencies and objectives. For this, today's learning objectives are: at the end of the lecture, we should be able to know the various teaching learning methods. We should be able to classify and describe various teaching learning methods, discuss efficiency and effectiveness of the various teaching learning methods, discuss advantages and disadvantages, and finally choosing the right teaching learning method for objectives with one sample exercise. So, teaching learning method, basically what we are taking as first what we are doing daily in day to day routine practice is classroom teaching, in which it may be large group like we do lecture, it may be small group where we do small group discussion, seminar, debate, we can have role play. For clinical skill teaching, we have basically ward rounds and bedside teaching, and for that we have various models which I will be describing after few slides. Newer methods, we have skill lab, in which we follow the rule of DOAP, that is demonstrate, observe, assess, perform. Model and simulation devices. Then there is a self-directed learning that we adults are doing, and then there is a distance learning which we right now are doing. So, teaching learning methods are basically regardless of which method is used, one needs expertise in that subject. We should have communication skill. That communication skill is basically consists of, we should have command on language, we should have voice modulation, and the body language is required. Starting with the lecture, what is lecture? A process by which the notes of a teacher becomes the notes of the student without passing through the minds of either. So, we do not want that. Types of lecture, there may be didactic lecture, that is called, basically what we are doing, we might do is spoon feeding the student with pre-digested facts, and it may have core and non-core components. Core component means the basic content of the course, and non-core component means beyond the core. Like if we are teaching cirrhosis because of hepatitis B, that is core content, and if we are doing newer researches of hepatitis B and the newer treatments and various research studies, that is non-core component. So, the lecture may be didactic lecture, that lecture may be interactive lecture, the teacher interacts with the student, or teacher might interact with the patient and everybody is watching. It may be shared lecture, in which the two or more lectures may share the session to present the multi-professional approach or opinions on a topic. Like two person are having, if I am teaching treatment of cirrhosis, I might treat the regular treatment of the cirrhosis, and other person, my colleague, can teach the newer aspects of the treatment of cirrhosis. It may be mini symposium. Mini symposium in which the various topics are covered by the various different teachers. Like if the same topic if we take like cirrhosis, then one person might be covering the etiology, other is covering the clinical features, then diagnosis, then treatment. So, it is like that, and the whole topic is covered by various teachers. So, the benefit is you have different exposure and different experiences also. What are the advantage of lecture? When we know that it is like giving the knowledge only, what is the advantage? Because it is important for imparting the information and the knowledge. For knowledge in various competencies, as we know, the knowledge, the core competency, knowledge is very important, attitude, and then comes the skill. So, knowledge, for knowledge it is very important way to teach is lecture. And the second important part is we can use the multimedia and can show the images and videos. But disadvantage, cannot teach all competencies. It is basically information and the knowledge. How to make lectures effective? If we have to give information and we want that lecture should go in a better way, then there should be a flow. How to maintain the flow? There should be a beginning, like I am starting this lecture and grab the attention. So, from beginning you should have attention. Then there should be a logical flow. For getting attention in between, starting it is fine, everybody is looking at you and it is very easy, but when the lecture goes on, if it is like 45-minute lecture, it is very difficult to create a longer attention span. So, we can use different techniques, like we can use a humor, we can experience, we can tell a story, we can tell a small experience like giving an example of your OPD patient and giving an example of some interesting cases, then they start looking at you and they start listening to you. So, getting attention is very important, and promote active listening. If we cannot interact much, then promote active listening by giving various experiences. For getting attention, for our lecture to be very interactive, the mnemonic we use is AEIOU. A, attract attention, the most important thing. B, second is AE, establish rapport, rapport is very important. I, identify knowledge base. Then O, objectives should be very clear, and U is indicate usefulness, because we are teaching adults and they know why they are sitting here. So, if they feel it is useful to them, they will listen definitely. So, usefulness should be there, the key messages should be there. So, if a lecture is having attention, we have good rapport, and we can identify the knowledge, we can provide some objectives, and finally the usefulness is being told, then it is very good lecture. How to do presentation? For presentation, everything is important. Where to stand? Ideally, we should stand at a place where everything is visible. How to speak? We should have modulation of the speech. We should have eye contact. How to make eye contact? If we are having like 50 people in a class, how to make eye contact is very difficult. So, what we suggest that we should have focus on particular person, like if 25 are sitting here, 25 are sitting there, we can have eye contact with person on the left, then we can have eye contact with the person on the right, and then we change it. So, when the students are seeing that we are making eye contact, they also show enthusiasm that next time my teacher might see me. So, it is very important, and beware of the dimming of the light, that may be that is not very good. When to change the style, you should know. If the lecture is getting boring, the teacher also knows somehow. So, if you think that it is monotonous, change your style. Just start, you can stand in between the student, you can change your style, you can give some humor in the class. So, like that we can make the presentation beautiful. Highlights. How can I help my student to learn during my lecture? If we have this question while making presentation, the presentation becomes really good. So, we should have this question and we should ask this question again and again. How can I help my student? We are here to help our student, and that should be very clear, and we should tell ourselves also. So, while preparing the lecture, 2-3 times at least we should ask, how can I help my student to learn during my lecture? And when you are delivering a lecture, say it, again say it, and say again what you have already said. So, repetition is very important. So, again and again saying the same thing might be very important for your student. Ensure that you have arrived at correct lecture theatre, that is also important to start a good beginning and good flow. The second important thing of lecture, which I like the most, we can use board, we can use OHP, and we can use PowerPoint. So, there is many media which can be used for lecture. We can use multimedia, presentation, PowerPoint, all we know. There are different types what we can use for the lecture. One is chalkboard and whiteboard. The advantages are it is very simple, and speed allows the student to take note because it is bit slow. The limitation is it is time consuming, it is difficult to display the complex table and charts. Second is chalkboard, whiteboard. Suggestions for effectiveness of the chalkboard or whiteboard. We should have good illumination, we should ensure the clarity in writing, do not overcrowd the board, that is very important, it should be visible, and we should only write the key points, not the whole lecture. And position of teacher is also important. If I am standing here and writing something and if it is not as visible to the student, then there is no point writing. Second, we use PowerPoint. The advantages, as we know, it is good for large room and can be creative. So, everybody is attentive. but limitation expensive, okay, that's fine nowadays. Room must be darkened somewhat, so that maybe if it is darkened, the student might fall asleep. How to make a PowerPoint effective? There is some rule. The font size should be more than 18. Avoid all caps. Use as a sentence writing. Font style should be, the heading should be in Vardhana and text should be in Times Arial or Calibri. Rule of 6 is applied, that is 6 lines per visual and 6 words per line. So, every line should have 6 words and there should be maximum 6 lines per slide. If we are following that, then it is really effective PowerPoint. And use short sentences and bullets, like what we are doing in chalk writing also, give the key points. So, this is how we make the PowerPoint smart. Next is overhead transparencies. The advantages, instructor can face the audience and we have the written thing there, so we can face the audience. Limitation, must know how to use the instrument, yes, and it's not that cost. Overhead projector also, how to make it effective is computer printing if you are using rather than writing, it is more clear and it is good. Use again 6 lines per slide, 6 words in each line, 5 to 7 mm tall. While teaching, show 1 point at a time. So, it should be very clear, like if I am using the 6 lines, 6 words, and while teaching, show 1 point at a time. So, these are some points with which we can make our lecture effective, like using multimedia, using PowerPoint, and taking those points which can make the lecture effective and make the lecture interactive. Coming to the small group teaching. Small group teaching means teaching a group of 8 to 10 students. Student participation is a main feature. So, it is very interactive, that is the beauty of the small group teaching. So, one example is tutorial. Tutorial is where the teacher centered it is a teacher centered activity. Teacher is basically is involved and ask different questions to see the knowledge of the student. Like if the series of lecture has been taken from hepatology, if I am taking the same example, and everything is covered. So, now I want to know up to what extent the students knows. So, I might ask question like about jaundice, about cirrhosis, about hepatitis, and we can see if they are aware. So, taken after series of lecture, teacher finds out the extent of learning and it is a kind of mini teaching. So, tutorials are very good, especially if you are taking after the series of lecture. So, it will be like repetition of the knowledge and it is interactive too. Second is group discussion. Group discussion is student center. Teacher acts as a facilitator. I will give some example. It is an active learning by the student and student interaction is very important. There is a one group leader which we select as a teacher and teacher acts as a facilitator. There is no spoon feeding, there is no authoritative role by the teacher. Teacher will not show any authorization over the student. It's like if we take the same example of cirrhosis. So, there are 6 students who have already learned the cirrhosis by the lecture and now there is a group discussion about the cirrhosis. There are 5-6 students and there is one teacher who acts as a facilitator. So, the facilitator will watch that every student is interactive or not. There are some silent students which are not very talkative and are not interacting. So, what we suggest that we can take that student as a group leader to make the discussion more interactive. So, everybody is involved by this and we can have a very good session of group discussion and every topic can be covered. If we are having a group discussion or tutorial, how to improvise it? The objective should be very clear and we should tell this in advance. Like if we are having group discussion, the student is not aware what happens in group discussion, we can tell them there will be one group leader. So, they are very enthusiastic. They think that next time I will be the group leader. So, there is one positive reinforcement that next time maybe I will be the group leader and they take it very positively. So, we should have a clear objective, we should avoid yes or no question. there should be a discussion about the topic, like if I would take the same example, there should be they should say that these are the causes of cirrhosis, these are the clinical feature, then one person is adding some more clinical features, so everybody is getting that knowledge. And we can provide positive feedback. We can say in between, oh, you are doing very good and this is how we should go, and it may be very enthusiastic discussion also. We can show enthusiasm and we can assign role to the student, as I just said. So we can improvise the group discussions and it may be really wonderful. Third is, after covering the small group teaching, in which I have covered group discussion and the tutorial, the next is role play. For acquiring skill, especially role play is very important, especially for the communication skill. In the student only, one student becomes will play the role of doctor and one student can play the role of patient, and then they will start talking. So a teacher will act as an observer. So they show a lot of enthusiasm because they are going to be doctor, and when you say that now you are going to play role as a doctor, they are really very enthusiastic. And like we do with a smaller kid, we can do with these big kids also. So it's really very good. And if I take an example of malaria, and one person is coming to pretend doctor that I'm having fever with chills and rigors, then another person will ask, okay, for how many days you are taking, what is the pattern of the fever, then everybody who are listening are also getting the experience, and they impart in the act with a lot of enthusiasm. So there the benefit is the active participation of the other student, and here also feedback is possible because as a teacher we are observing it, and in between we can give the feedbacks. So that's a very important role, very important type of teaching learning method, that is role play. So in small group I have covered role play, group discussion and tutorials. Next, clinical skill teaching. What we are doing day to day in our life is bedside teaching or ward rounds. So here there is a quote, to study the phenomena of disease without books is to sail an uncharted sea, whilst to study books without patient is not to go to sea at all. So the both are very important. Bedside teaching has its own beauty, and there are various methods which is given for skill teaching. One is observer model. In busy OPT, observation of the teacher and patient happens, and the student observes the interaction between the doctor and the teacher. If I give an example, the intern is sitting in OPD, it is very busy OPD, and you are seeing a patient. So you asked few questions, then you examined the patient and you wrote the prescription. And the student who is looking at you, you can ask directly, what have you observed? Then he might give the answer that I have observed that you asked a question about fever, you asked question about and you examine the spleen, you examine the chest. So you can listen to in very quickly, you can listen and just give your point very clearly, like, yes, I suspected UTI, so I took the history of UTI. So it is like that, in which the student observes the interaction of teacher and the patient. This is old model which we are doing also. Second is direct responsibility model, in which this story is different. The student interact with the patient and the teacher observes and provides feedback. Like a student is interacting with the patient for the first time and he is asking, okay, you are having fever, are you having burning micturition? And the teacher is listening and he can immediately provide feedback, why you never ask about the cough. So like that. So this is direct responsibility model. Third is stage approach, in which what we are doing actually, in which there are stage approach. Like first we demonstrate, if we take a procedure like putting IV cannula, we demonstrate putting IV cannula. In next time, repetition of the demonstration with explanation. This is the radial, this is the vein and how to find the vein and how to put in the cannula, how to select the size and how to do it. Next stage is performance by the teacher, and now the student will explain it. So, student will explain, and the next stage comes when the performance is done by the student under supervision. So, demonstration, repetition of the demonstration with explanation, performance by teacher and explanation with the student, then finally the performance is done by the student under supervision. Then there comes 1 minute preceptor model. 1 minute preceptor model is very interesting model which can be done with the budding doctors. Like if we have a case in ward, and he is a case of say we will take this time a case of delirium. So, first important thing in 1 minute preceptor model is ask what have you seen and take the commitment. Like immediately ask what is your thinking, why the patient is having delirium. Then the student might say that patient is having delirium because of UTI. Then you correct it. You ask him why you haven't think of anything else. So, a student might say that because he was having chest crackles and history of cough, that's why I thought pneumonia as a, just in case pneumonia as the cause of delirium. Then you may correct it then and there, and you may give the positive feedback also. So, 1 minute preceptor model is very important, and it can be done easily in the ward rounds. Then comes the newer method, skill labs. Skill lab hands-on training is done with the practical lab, and what we are doing also, we demonstrate, we observe, we assist and perform. So, mannequins and model simulation devices are used for it. So, this just a repetition, what is DOPE? DOPE is demonstration, a practical session that allows a student to observe a demonstration, assist the performer and perform in a simulated environment, and finally perform under supervision or perform independently. That is called DOPE model. Models and simulation devices can be used, and we have simulation devices. These are 3-dimensional, almost looking equal to the as a human body. The limitation, this is quite expensive, and it can be used only in the small group, not with the larger group. Then comes the self-directed learning in newer methods. So, I have covered a newer method. First is models, and then the self-directed learning. Learner takes initiative in making use of resources with or without help of others. So, the learner himself wants to get learned. That is the important, is learning to learn, and diagnose the learning needs, formulate learning goals, identifying the resources for learning, and finally they choose the strategies. So, it is basically learning by the self-directed learning is learning by the learner. And finally comes the distance learning. That is also a very important way of teaching. Is it just corresponding course? No, it is not just correspondence course. Nowadays distance learning has its own way of teaching. It does not depend totally on printed material. It is not a loaner. It is not like I am giving you material and you read. There is support. There is support with which you can interact, and you can ask your question, your problems, and that will be solved. There is a facilitator present, and it is actually two-way learning. The learner is asking something, the teacher is also getting learned and getting more wiser. So, for distance learning, the first point is we formulate the curriculum. After that, there is a production of SIM. SIM is self-instructional material, means we provide a material to the student, and that contains the information. Then there is a distance teaching, not only the material is provided, but there is teaching also done. Finally, we assist the learner, and there is also advantage of student support group, and that is very important. They interact with each other and they solve the problems. So, this is about distance learning. So, we have covered for large group, we covered the small group teaching, we covered the practical skill teaching, and then the newer method in which we covered the distance learning method, and then the newer method self-directed learning. Now, I will take one example for the choosing teaching learning method for competency exercise. As we know, the main domain of the competency is knowledge, skill, attitude and communication. So, if I want a student to learn about malaria, I want student to learn about diagnosis a case of malaria. Then objectives, what I want the student to learn the epidemiology, malarial parasite and clinical feature. For this is basically knowledge, then I might go for lecture or bedside teaching. If I want a lab diagnosis to be done, that is basically skill, how to draw the blood, how to make smear, how to stain it and how to do microscopy, that is it can be done in practical lab with the dope model. Taking history, educating on prevention, that is basically attitude and communication. If I want my student to learn about attitude and communication in these points, then role play, field trip or bedside teaching might work. So, this is how we should go about, and we should choose the different teaching learning methods. Thank you.